The lyric sheet sat on the music stand, and 8-year-old Michael picked it up without a word. The producer smirked from behind the glass. He'd switched the lyrics on purpose, but 12 seconds into the take, Michael stopped cold and said 4 words that made everyone freeze. "These aren't the real ones." The studio went dead silent. Robert Chen had been producing records for 11 years, and he'd heard every excuse in the book. Artists who couldn't hit the note, singers who needed 40 takes, kids who cried when the pressure got too high. But this, an 8-year-old calling out wrong lyrics on a song he'd never heard before? That didn't happen. Not in his studio, not in any studio he'd ever worked in. Chen leaned forward, his finger hovering over the talkback button. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't care. The equipment hummed softly around him. The familiar buzz of electronics, the faint whir of tape reels waiting to spin. The smell of old vinyl and machine oil hung in the air, mixing with the stale cigarette smoke that never quite left the walls. Michael stood in the booth, headphones slightly too big for his small head, the lyric sheet still in his hands. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He just looked certain. Like he'd tasted something bitter and knew instantly it was spoiled. His brothers sat outside in the waiting area, their voices muffled through the thick studio door. But Michael hadn't looked back at them once. His focus was total. "How do you know they're wrong?" Chen's voice crackled through the speaker, flat and skeptical. Michael glanced down at the paper, then back up at the glass. His reflection stared back at him from the control room window. Small, serious, unflinching. Because they don't fit the melody. The words are fighting the music. The assistant engineer, Danny, shot Chen a look. Chen ignored it. Danny had only been on staff for 6 months. He didn't understand what this moment meant yet. "Run it again," Chen said flatly. "Same lyrics." Michael hesitated, just for a second. His small fingers tightened on the edge of the music stand. Then he nodded, set the paper back carefully, and waited for the track to restart. No argument, no tantrum, just quiet compliance that somehow felt louder than a shout. But here's the part you can't miss. Chen wasn't being cruel, he was being careful, deliberate. 3 months earlier, another producer had brought in a so-called child prodigy who'd memorized 15 songs but couldn't improvise a single note. The kid had been packaged, rehearsed, polished to a mirror shine, and the moment the arrangements changed, he'd fallen apart completely. Tears, panic, a father screaming in the lobby. Chen had sworn he'd never waste studio time on another manufactured act. So when Joe Jackson called him about his sons, 5 boys who could supposedly sing and dance, Chen had agreed to 1 session, 1 test, and if the kids couldn't handle real studio pressure, the kind that separated performers from pretenders, he'd walk. No second chances. That's why he'd rewritten the second verse that morning, not to trick Michael, but to see if the kid could actually think, to see if he'd break or adapt. The track started again. Drums, bass, a smooth chord progression that felt like summer breaking through clouds. Michael closed his eyes, swaying slightly, his small frame moving with the rhythm like it was coming from inside him. And when his cue came, he sang the wrong lyrics exactly as written. But his voice sounded off. Not bad, not weak, just hesitant, uncertain. Like he was reading a script in a language that wasn't quite his own. The phrasing didn't lock. The emotion felt painted on instead of lived in. Chen stopped the track after 16 bars. "Okay," he said slowly, carefully. "Why don't you tell me what you think the lyrics should be?" Michael looked down at the paper, his small finger tracing the lines like he was reading Braille. "This part, walking down the street in the morning light, it's in the wrong place. The melody rises here." He hummed a few bars, his voice clear and easy. No strain, no effort. The words should rise with it. Something like, running through the fields where the sun shines bright. It matches the feeling. It matches what the music is trying to say. Danny's pen stopped mid-note. He stared at the console like it had just spoken to him in a foreign language. Chen blinked, twice. The kid wasn't just hearing the mismatch, he was solving it. In real time. Without a reference track. Without a second take to think it through. "You came up with that just now?" Chen asked. "It fits better," Michael said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Chen sat back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He looked at Danny. Danny looked at the tape machine, its reels sitting motionless, waiting. Neither of them said a word, but they both knew what they'd just heard. This wasn't rehearsal. This wasn't memorization. This wasn't a kid repeating what his father drilled into him. This was instinct. Raw, unfiltered, honest instinct. "All right," Chen said, keeping his voice steady even though his pulse had kicked up. "Let's try it your way." He scribbled the new lyrics on a fresh sheet of paper, his handwriting rushed and uneven. He buzzed the intern to run it into the booth. The kid appeared 30 seconds later, handed Michael the paper, and disappeared just as fast. Michael read it once. Just once. Nodded, and then set it aside on the floor. "Wait," he set it aside. "You don't need to look at it?" Chen asked, leaning closer to the glass. "I've got it," Michael said. His tone wasn't cocky, it was matter of fact. Chen exchanged another glance with Danny. Danny just shrugged, his expression somewhere between disbelief and awe. The track rolled. And this time, when Michael sang, the hesitation was gone. Completely. His voice locked into the melody like it had been there all along. Every word landing exactly where it needed to. The rise and fall, the breath control, the way he leaned into the emotional peaks without overselling them. It wasn't the performance of an 8-year-old. It was the performance of someone who understood what the song was trying to say before the songwriter did. Before the producer did, before anyone in that room did. One take, no punch-ins, no corrections. When it finished, the studio stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. The tape reels stopped spinning. The music faded, and no one moved. Then Danny hit the talkback, his voice slightly unsteady. That was perfect. That was absolutely perfect. Michael grinned, the headphones sliding slightly down his forehead. For the first time all session, he looked like a kid. "Can I hear it back?" Chen played the take. Michael listened, his head tilted, his expression serious again, his eyes focused on some invisible point in the air where the sound lived. When it ended, he looked up at the glass, and Chen saw something flicker in the boy's eyes. Not pride, not satisfaction, curiosity. "The harmony in the second chorus is a little thin," Michael said. "Can I double it?" Chen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He felt like someone had just moved the furniture in his brain without asking. "You want to add a harmony," he repeated slowly, making sure he'd heard correctly. "Yeah, just to fill it out, it needs something else, something higher." Danny leaned over to Chen, his voice barely a whisper. "He's 8. "I know how old he is," Chen muttered. He hit the talkback. "Go ahead, one pass, let's see what you got." Michael put the headphones back on, listened to the playback once, and then sang a harmony line that wove perfectly between the lead vocal. He didn't chart it, didn't ask for a reference pitch, didn't hum it through first to test it. He just heard it, and then he sang it. Clean, precise, musical. When the session ended 2 hours later, Chen had 6 usable takes and 2 spontaneous harmonies he hadn't planned for. He walked Michael out to the lobby where Joe Jackson sat reading a newspaper, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. Joe stood up the moment they entered, folding the paper with sharp, deliberate movements. "How'd he do?" Joe asked. His voice was flat, controlled. But Chen could hear the tension underneath it. Chen looked down at Michael, who was swinging his arms slightly, humming the melody they'd just recorded under his breath. The boy seemed completely unaware of the weight of the moment. Or maybe he just didn't care. "He corrected my lyrics," Chen said. Joe's face didn't change, not a muscle. "He give you trouble?" "No." Chen crouched down so he was eye level with Michael. The boy met his gaze without flinching. "He gave me the truth, and the truth was better than what I wrote." Michael smiled, shy but bright, his whole face lighting up for just a second. Chen stood back up, his knees cracking, slightly. He looked Joe square in the eye. "Bring him back next week, and bring the rest of your boys. If they're half as sharp as this one, we've got something worth building." Joe nodded once, his jaw tight, his expression still carefully neutral. But as they walked toward the door, Chen saw it. The smallest flicker of pride in the man's eyes. Just for a second. A crack in the armor. Then it was gone, smoothed over like it had never existed. Danny appeared beside Chen, holding the tape reel like it was made of glass. "You really think the other brothers are like him?" Chen watched through the glass door as Michael climbed into the back seat of the car, still humming, his small hand tapping a rhythm against the window. "I don't know, but that kid?" He shook his head slowly. "That kid hears music the way most people hear their own heartbeat. Constant, automatic, true. He doesn't perform it, he lives it." Danny looked down at the reel in his hands. "We keeping the version with his lyrics?" "We're keeping everything," Chen said. "Every take, every note, every word. Because 5 years from now, when people ask how we knew, I want proof. I want to be able to say we were there. We heard it first." He walked back to the mixing board, his fingers already moving toward the faders, muscle memory taking over. On the notepad beside the console, he wrote a single line in careful block letters, pressing hard enough that the pen left an indent on the page below. "MichaelJackson, age 8. Doesn't just perform music, he corrects it. Doesn't need the paper, he's already got it inside. This one's different. This one's going to change everything we thought we knew." The tape sat on the shelf for 3 weeks, labeled and logged but untouched. And when the label exec finally came in to review the month's recordings, Chen played the take with Michael's rewritten lyrics. He didn't explain, he didn't set it up, he just played it. The exec listened in silence, his fingers drumming once on the armrest, then stopping. When the song ended, he looked up, his expression carefully blank. "Who wrote the second verse?" Chen leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, watching the man's face. "The kid, the 8-year-old? Yeah." The exec stared at the speaker for a long moment, his jaw working slightly like he was chewing on the information. Then he looked at Chen, then back at the speaker. "Play it again." Chen did. And this time, when the song ended, the exec didn't ask any more questions. He didn't need to. He just picked up the phone on Chen's desk and called the contract department. "Get me the paperwork for the Jackson boys, all of them. I want them signed before someone else hears this." That's how it started. Not with a polished audition, not with a staged showcase in front of industry executives, but with a kid who heard something wrong and had the courage, the clarity to say it out loud. 4 words that made a room full of grown men stop and listen. These aren't the real ones. And he was right. He'd always been right.